if you can get to a place in this world where you can sit in a coffee shop with your three best friends and just tell jokes and have a good time, and you can do that again and again and again, and it never gets bored, like you found it. And not everyone has the luxury of being someone without a job and being a comedian and whatever. Like sometimes work has to be that place where you're having those connections and that where you love to come every day. And
financial independence,
freedom,
financial picture,
independent financially,
financial future,
financial freedom and wealth,
financial independence,
get your fill, financial independence and long life. Welcome back to another episode of Get Your Fill, Financial Independence and Long Life, where we explore ways to achieve those two goals. And people come on and help us do exactly that. And that's why I'm very excited, because we have a cool guest today who's done all the stuff you want to do and probably more. Greg Martin is with us today, and Greg is part of the founding team at Origin Merchant Partners, which is a boutique investment bank focused on mergers and acquisitions and working with entrepreneurs of all kinds every day. He previously founded and operated a restaurant, catering, and food e-commerce business, which he's since exited, which I think a lot of people who have managed to enter something might also want to think about exiting it and how to do that in a good way. In addition, he's the host of the Lifetime at Work podcast, which is all about exploring the careers of different people with the pains, struggles, and the fulfillment that they can bring. Welcome, Greg.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So I want to jump right in. So I want to hear all about you, and I want to hear about your background, all this kind of stuff. But I really selfishly want to start with the idea of selling a business. So you have a business and it's cool and you love it, but you've been there, done that, time to do something new. And rather than just shuttering it and walking away, some of us would like to think about, how do you sell it? How do you value it? How do you kind of go about attracting people to do that? And so I know that's a giant, and probably very specific question, but can you give us some like broad brush idea about, is that even really realistic if you don't have a multi-million-dollar, unicorn?
It certainly is. I think the way to frame it for yourself, though, is being realistic potentially in who could the buyer could be and who could afford it and who would want it and what value you're creating. So really, when you get down to it, thinking about why would someone ever buy my business? And it comes down to, well, you got to do something that they either can't do themselves or is worth it for whatever price they might pay. And so sure, you could have a little corner store where you're selling, it could be a hair salon, it could be because you're selling convenience products. And so the question is there value there for someone paying you? You build this business and then you decide to sell it. Is there value there for someone to take it over? And as long as there is, then they would. And versus the alternatives they have, which is likely just starting their own store themselves. So if you can create something that provides value for someone where it's easier than starting that themselves, then yes, there's always value you can create if you can sort of find a buyer and get your business into that state.
I'm assuming that some of the things you'd want to do ahead of time, or make it really profitable so that you can, they'll be starting off with success. But also, does it matter, like, is it better to start a couple of locations, or are there things that you can do to make your company more valuable?
Yeah, for sure. One of them is trying to get a situation where the founder, the person who started the business, isn't doing everything. Like, they don't have to be there all the time, and that can be really hard. It is naturally very hard. And it's not to say that your business has no value if that isn't the case, but the more you can do that, the more that someone else can potentially come in and see themselves buying your business and operating it. It's easier if they have to do a lot of stuff. And if they have to learn all these things that you've spent 20 years learning, like, that's hard, right? And so it does hurt the value of your business in that sense. So a lot of what you're trying to do is build things, yes, and that have value, and build things where you can have it to enough scale where it can operate by itself, but with I guess is the least amount of care and attention that you're going to need at all times. And so that gets into profitability as well. If you have a small business, again, think of it as a convenience store where you are the only person. You're there, you're the clerk, you do all the ordering, you do everything. Then it's a bit harder for someone to step into, because they're probably not really buying your business. They're kind of buying a job. But if you can make it so that it's a business with 20 people and maybe it's a few locations, and that just more substantial and there's something bigger there, then yes, that is something that would take a while for someone else to create. And so there's, again, value coming into them wanting to buy your business.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm assuming also, like you're saying, you want to work yourself out of a job. You want to be, even for your own sake, right? Even if you don't sell it, you don't want to be the person who's there 24/7 answering calls and taking care of it. It's your personality and you're really the whole meat of the business because then, and I'm thinking about it too, because one of my hats is I'm a real estate broker and that's something that often happens, right? The real estate agent says, "Oh, I'm going to retire. I'd like to sell my business," but their business is really just them. It's their
Right.
relationships, right? They haven't built a system. They haven't built an infrastructure that's going to be able to live on after they retire.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of us probably do that. So let's hop back into now. We got all my selfish stuff out of the way. Let's. So you had a sort of a traditional, it sounds like a traditional beginning, a traditional sort of white collar job. And then you said, oh, okay, I've done this. Let's do something more exciting. Tell me about your evolution into kind of where you are now.
Yeah, so I'm a Canadian, and I decided after I went to university, and we call it university, you guys often call it college, but I went to university and realized I didn't know anything. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't even know what business I would be in or how I would approach it. I had no idea. I just felt like I didn't know anything about the world despite all the school I had done. And so managed to get a job in Bay Street, on Bay Street, which is the Wall Street of Canada. And there was just a great opportunity to learn. You're working all the time. I was working, an intense job, 80, 100-hour weeks, and it was intense, but I was learning and that was great. And so I told myself I would do it for 2 to 3 years and then the world would be totally open and I could do anything from there. And so I hit the 10-year mark of being in investment banking and I sort of had a mini crisis of just, what am I doing? Is this the rest of my life? Now I wasn't working 100-hour weeks all those 10 years by any means. It got better and it molded and I advanced and all that. But I started to just think a lot about other things that I could do and what else was out there really, like what I wanted my career to be in the long term, because I was so busy I never really thought about it. And so I began to think, and that's all I could think about. And I had founded and started and invested in a food business. It was a restaurant and catering business. And so at a certain point I decided that I was going to leave my day job and go do this. And I got increasingly involved. I was leaving to go be an entrepreneur. I thought, hey, I could do this and I could maybe do, other businesses if I sort of figured it out. And I just really wanted to, again, learn something different. And so it was going fine, I think. It took some time. We figured out the business in many ways. And then the pandemic hit and we were very tied to office lunches and office catering. And as soon as that happened, I knew our business would have to change forever. And it was really challenging time for a while. It was very, it was just a lot of just personal anxiety around what was going to happen because I didn't know. And so I slowly ended up finding my way coming back into investment banking, the career that I had done before, with this newfound, completely different perspective on everything because I had gone through this experience. So for me, it was sort of this, I don't know, almost an MBA that I did by going and starting a business and trying to make it work. And in the end, it didn't work out. And I feel like we don't always talk about all the businesses that don't work out, but for me, it was one where you do have to think about that as the exit. There's the exit that is something that is amazing where you go retire. Then there's the exit where you lose all your money and you need to get a job again. And I was somewhere in between there, but I didn't lose all my money, but it was obviously financially challenging when your business doesn't succeed like that. And so you then have to change and figure out what you're going to do with it. So that's a bit of my story. In amongst that, I started a podcast, but that's a whole other stream. So,
and we'll talk about the podcast for sure. But let's keep going with this for a little while. So tell us about what you're doing now. Tell us about your new take on the financial world.
So now I work at a business called Origin Merchant Partners. We're an advisory firm. We help give advice to primarily entrepreneurs, board of directors, that sort of thing. And in most cases, it is M&A, which is when a company wants to sell itself. Oftentimes, too, when they're trying to raise capital, that can look very similar. And it's something that you don't do all the time, and is challenging to do, I think, as well, because you're trying to find a partner, you're trying to find a home, you're trying to find out who can take over this. And so that's what we do. And it's advice that I feel like sometimes people, and you're in real estate, they feel like maybe they don't need, and then you get into it and you're like, oh my God, I'm so thankful that I have it, because it's a tough world out there. The people, especially when you buy your business, now we tend to work with larger businesses that are, tens of millions in terms of, value and revenue and that sort of thing. are, but oftentimes, the buyers of them are private equity and big corporations, and they're, sophisticated buyers. And you running your business are not always sophisticated. You're busy running your operation. You don't know how to deal with the world. You don't even know who the buyers are. You don't know anything. So we do that. We help with effectively, running the whole process and finding that right home for your business after you're done with it effectively. So we do.
Do you have repeat clients, people who are like building a business, getting it ready, then selling it, and then doing it all over again?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually would say the majority of our business comes from referrals. Now, it's not always that it's your business the second or third or fourth time. A lot of times, though, you've sold your business and then you enter into this network of people who have also done the same thing or may have a business, or they're asking for advice or capital, and a lot of our referrals, a lot of our clients come from that stream. So yeah, in many cases, sometimes people definitely have sold it, or maybe they were the more junior person the first time around, and then now they're the senior person who founded a business, and then they come back and they say, hey, I'm ready to sort of sell my business now. And so that's, again, a good place for us to help out with.
And it's a great niche, right? I mean, you're right. It's a very specialized thing. It's not the kind of thing people are going to often do over and over again. So they aren't developing any kind of expertise. Even if you went through it once with your business, that doesn't make you ready to go tackle it another time. So
Totally. Yeah. And it's, again, I come back to it. You're up against, in theory, very sophisticated buyers in many cases. And so it is helpful to have someone on your side that can be helpful in doing that. And in the end, it's your decision as a seller. You can go through the whole process of trying to sell your business and then just decide not to at the end. And that's fine. Like, that happens because you're not always ready, or you don't always find the best situation or buyer or price or whatever it is. But going through it, it's helpful to not be alone. I feel like it's something where people naturally, when you're going to sell your business, you're a little afraid to tell the world about it. You don't really want to, because it's just it's an awkward conversation for what does it mean for your employees? What does it mean for, I don't know, all of a sudden you get money involved. All of a sudden you have all these things happening. And so, rather than keep it as hush hush as possible, you have so at least someone there who can guide you through it and find a good partner again. So.
well, you're right, because it could impact how your clients are feeling. It could impact your sales. And then all of a sudden, the company that was so valuable that you wanted to sell, people are
Exactly.
leaving, heading for the hills. And then
Yeah.
that's a bummer. How did you, I mean, you sort of said, and then I decided to start this business, but how did it all come about? I mean, what was the impetus? I mean, I guess I'm asking for all entrepreneurs who are thinking like, okay, I know how to do this thing, but you didn't just leave what you were doing and go start a
Right.
company that does the same thing, right? You really took a piece of it. And how did you go through that process?
Yeah. So it started with, when you have time. When you have time, you start thinking about different things and different ideas, and that's how it started with me. I knew I had wanted to be an entrepreneur at some point in my life. It wasn't a matter of if, it was really when. And so I reached a point where I thought, I've got at least a certain number of skills, and I'm young enough that I probably might make sense to do it now. And then it's okay, well, then what business do you start? And I was thinking a lot through that. I had done a lot of work in the food industry at my job, so I knew it from a certain respect. And so came up with an idea. I don't know if it was because I was working a lot, and my outlet in a ways, or my relaxing time, was always out eating somewhere, where I'd meet a friend for lunch or dinner, or we'd go and do something. And I think I just got caught up in that world, just be curiosity really on that world and how it works. And so when I decided to go into this and kind of get into the food world, for me, it was a thought around, hey, if in the worst case scenario, I go and spend time and money in an industry and learn a lot about it, and I like that industry, and so I will be happy that I did that, rather than getting into something that I'm just not passionate or interested about, but maybe it does, maybe it's a better field. And that was, I don't know if that's good advice, but that's what I told myself in going in and doing it. At least I was passionate. And a lot of people do say that when you listen to entrepreneurial podcast startup type things, they do talk a lot about finding something that you're really passionate about and that you enjoy. And so, and that was it for me. It's just a whole other layer then to think about, okay, how do you make that a viable business in the long run? That is the battle. That is what is hard about it. And what sort of was my struggle in the end in trying to ultimately kind of figure out for something that would be long term.
Yeah. Well, and it is tempting when you have an entrepreneurial spirit to just say, well, I like to eat, I'll open a restaurant, right? I like
Yeah,
to cook, I'll open a restaurant. And there's just so much more to it than that if you actually want to
there is.
succeed.
There is.
But that happens all the time, right? I love to cook, I'll open a restaurant. I know nothing about business. I'm going to eat, right? And then they
Yeah,
don't.
like the advice that I give people now, though, because I've gone through it, and I try not to be. I like to try to tell people that I failed and not to. I mean, a lot of people will say, "I don't know," but there was a pandemic, and I'm like, "Yeah, but even then, like it's still incredibly hard. In any case, it can be something. Like it doesn't have to. A lot of times, it's something out of your control that makes you fail,
Right.
and it's not. It's
Right.
not. You don't have to be afraid to say that you did or that you had to do something else, but. In taking that leap to get into it, for me, it was part of it was, hey, I'm going to go learn a bunch of stuff, but then also I'm very well qualified for the field that I came from. So yes, I was leaving the world of investment banking, but I was also very qualified to get back into it. So if I needed to, I could always do that. And so I think that gave me some confidence as well. And I usually also give that similar advice to other people as well as you don't have to just leave your job to go and try something else. So many people have a side hustle or they do something on the weekends or they get involved in maybe they invest in a business or get involved in a business on the side or something to explore whether they like it. And I tell people if that's the part of your day that you're looking most forward to and energizes you, then maybe that's a good sign that that's something. But if it's a chore and you're like, oh my God, I just finished at 5 o'clock and now I got to go to my second job and that's the worst thing ever, then maybe you shouldn't go all in on that.
Yeah. But that's a big question that people have is when do I know that it's okay for me to leave my day
Yeah.
job?
Yeah.
And there's no like when you can replace your income. Well, you probably aren't going to be able to do that if it's just a side hustle, right? So it makes it a little bit, you're walking out on the ledge a little bit.
For sure.
But you bring up a great point because a lot of people feel like if I go back to my day job, then I'm a failure. And so I tried it and now everyone will know I went down in flames and I can't do it. If I'm not going to be able to succeed, I'm just going to keep beating my head against the wall until I can, right? And that's
Yeah.
not the ideal scenario. So what prompted you to start the podcast?
So it happened during the pandemic, especially in Ontario, we were quite locked down and away from people. And I was, mid 30s thinking a lot about my career as I did, as we've been talking about, and having that type of conversation with everyone that I knew, frankly, and most other friends I had, and we were always discussing what are we doing, what's our career, where are we headed with this, I've done this for 10 years, but do I really like it for another 10 or 20 years? Like that was the discussion. And so I was like, hey, we should just record these and get going on sending that out to the world, because they were good conversations, and also though at times ones that are hard to have as well, because they're kind of, yeah, I don't know, they're just big. And so I realized though, in amongst having some of them, that we spend so much of our time, it's called lifetime at work. We spend so much of our lives at work. If we're not getting fulfillment, joy, accomplishment, money, whatever we're seeking through that, then you don't leave a lot of time for everything else. And so it should be that. It should be something where you can get enjoyment. And yes, it's not a straight line of just, okay, I'm just liking it more and moving up, it goes up and down. But that journey and that story and all that can be helpful to people. So it's, yeah, in many ways, a career advice podcast around just talking to people. I interview different guests every week, and it's just about their career journey, what they learned, what it's meant to them, where they're trying to go now, and those sorts of questions.
Yeah. And do you feel like, is there something that you've learned that you're like, oh, wow, I never would have known this, or this was a real pearl. I'm really glad I talked to this person. Is there something that kind of stands out?
I spend more time thinking about the commonalities between people and what they've done, who are most excited about their jobs. Because I do talk to people who are maybe less so, and they're still trying to figure it out, and other people. And I do find that having done different things really helps with that. So have a few pivots. It doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be a crazy pivot that you made, but a few of those really helps in terms of having a perspective around what is good for you, what you like, what makes you happy. So I'd say that's certainly the case. I get a lot of people trying to be on the podcast who are selling something, like they have a book or they have and they're trying to get the message out for some reason. And I do have to spend time trying to see through that and figure out, okay, but what's your actual message, or what's your sort of take on the world and work and all that, which can be hard to do. But there's a lot. I think that when you listen to, and my point is that when you listen to podcasts, I have one, you have one. you just get the sense that everyone's successful, everyone's got great, everyone loves everything, everything's amazing, and whatever. And it's not all the
I'm the
time.
only loser in the
Like,
world.
there's so many, there's so many challenging things out there that you have that it's work isn't always just super easy, and people go through a lot of anxiety and have a lot of struggles with it, and so you do start to see, and it's hard to get people to tell you that because they want to they want to be successful, so it's helpful to say that you're successful and to show that in what you're doing, but it's also something that at a certain point you got to talk about. You got to talk about your failures and what, because you learn. I don't know. I do believe you learn more from those than not. So I sort of answered your question, not totally, but that's
No, you did
my
though,
take and
actually.
takeaways from it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not yeah, I mean it's hard to do anyway. If somebody said to me, "Oh, what's your favorite episode you ever recorded?" or, what's the thing? I'd be like, I mean, perhaps it's 5 years now. I have no idea. Like I've had some really wonderful conversations, some really impactful stuff that I've now integrated into my life, and I don't even remember that that's where I got that.
Right, exactly. It does. It sort of changes you, and you don't
Yeah.
know how necessarily. It's not. You can't. Yeah, you can't go back and look at the logs quite the same way. So,
Yeah. But when you were first explaining like about loving your job or people who I was thinking that part of that because maybe they've pivoted or whatever, that they feel like they have more control over their destiny, I guess, as opposed to
Mhm.
someone who's just working all the time for someone else and who doesn't feel like they like once you make that leap and you say, all right, this job sucks, I'm going to go over here or I'm going to try something different, then you realize that it is in your control and you can be a little bit more demanding maybe about what you get from that job.
It certainly is always in your control. I actually found as an entrepreneur, and I did not expect this, that there was almost too much control. Like I had too much control, and that it was almost bad for me in some ways, where you can go off on some crazy tangents, and no one's going to tell you not to because there isn't anyone there. And
Exactly.
so you can, you're just kind of wasting your time. Whereas in a job where you have a boss and you're having to explain yourself, not even that they're criticizing you, but that you have to explain yourself and give a rationale for why you're going to spend money or do this or that, it helps you in doing that. So I think there's a lot of mentality. I imagine a lot of your listeners will sort of think of the boss as being their enemy in many ways, or like they're trying to get away from a boss. But I also have found that a business that you start is like the benefit of working for a boss is you can always quit and it's fast. When you have your own business and trying to get out of it in some way, or you realize it's not for you, or there's an issue or a stress or whatever, there's nowhere to run really. Like you can't. It's not easy to get out. And I didn't even real. I'm an M&A person. This is my job. My job for so long was to help people get out, and I didn't realize how hard it was to actually get out once you start and to have those conversations. So it is, and so I think the takeaway for me is that the enemy's not necessarily boss. It's more you. I tell people that you're really you can't change your boss. You can't. You're not. Don't try. Like it's really hard. You just got to figure out for yourself how you can work for them and work with them and figure out why they are the way they are, and how you can cooperate and work together. And that may be a helpful solution for you along the way. I think the solution and the reason to go into entrepreneurship in your own business, it shouldn't be that like I hate my boss. That's a bad reason. I think it needs to be a pull from like, hey, I want to go out and do this and accomplish this and create something different
Right.
that I
You're not
can't.
running away from a shit
Yeah,
situation, right?
yeah,
That's not a good impetus. And just like in a relationship, in any kind of relationship, right? You don't want to run away. You want to go towards something.
right.
Yeah. But also every boss, every person that you work with, no matter how irritating or whatever they might be, they have something to teach you. And if you figure out what it is, then all of a sudden you can change your perspective about them. And, you know,
Yeah, and it's hard. Like I'm not saying that's easy. It's
sure.
easy to say, it's hard to do, but like yeah, your boss has something to teach you and you can learn from, and so it's on you to figure out how to get that out of there and how to work with them to extract that information. And at a certain point you'll become smarter, or and you may need to switch jobs or switch roles or or go work for someone else and learn something different, but that is work. That is what we do.
Yeah. Of course, they're your boss for a reason. They have some
Yeah,
skill that you do not have. So figure it out.
there's
And
something
like you
there.
say,
Yeah.
yeah. And then, learn yourself into the next job. Have you been in your M&A, your most recent M&A world? Is there like a really fun, cool experience, like business or something that you've worked on, a project that you've worked on where you're like, oh man, I'm so glad I got to do that. That was just incredible. or surprising or something?
It kind of all is in some ways when you actually step back and reflect on it, because the conversations we're always having are pretty big ones, in the sense that they're like strategic choices around what a founder or a company or this or that are doing.
Yeah.
Earlier in my career, I worked with a lot of quite large, like billion-dollar public companies, and I was one of dozens on as part of the team, right? So you're pretty small in that sense of impact, but it's cool because you feel like you're being involved, like you're involved in making these decisions, that hey, this company's selling itself, this is a $3 billion deal, this is cool. Now I work with typically smaller companies, more in the, again, like I said, tens of millions, and it's just interesting to see the businesses they've created, that people have created, and what they've done. And so I think every time I'm having those conversations, I'm sort of like, oh, this is cool. How did you build this? Like, this is because there are really a lot of hard parts in getting to that stage. And there's a incredible modesty around, oh yeah, I guess I did do that. Sort of like that every founder has. But it's, pretty incredible that you have done that and created it. So I feel like that is, I'm still super intrigued by businesses today that I realize, like, wow, I heard about that business from seeing a truck or driving by, but I didn't know that they had done all that. That's incredible. So I feel like that's where I'm, I don't know, that's what piques my interest the most, usually.
Yeah. Well, and you were just making me wonder if there is a commonality between them. Like, I mean, I know one thing that is for sure a factor is persistence, right? You meet these people, you're like, these people have multi-million dollar businesses, but they're not the smartest people that I've ever met in my life. So what's this quality that allows them to be successful? And sometimes it's just that they just didn't give up. You're just like, oh, that didn't work. Let's do this. Let's do that, right? Persistence is definitely a factor. Is there anything you can think of that sort of also stands out to you in that way?
Yeah, I spend and like there are so many people whose job, like you think of the whole venture capital world, like that's all they're trying. That's the question they're just asking themselves. There's like, tens of hundreds of billions of in this industry trying to figure out that question. So it's a hard one, right?
Right.
Of what is the commonality? It's also something about just like there is a certain amount of luck and being in the right place, like picking the right industry and going after the right thing. Like I do think that is a really important thing in any success story, is just, hey, this happened to me and I didn't quite realize it, and it was just the right time. So trying to find those in your world today is I think pretty important. And then I think the other one though is it's something around people, and it's understanding, because no great big business was created by the founder only, like only them. They somehow figured out how they can get a team to amplify whatever they were doing, to do it faster, to be them, but better, and specialize and all that. And at a certain point, that becomes what is unique, what makes the business itself is finding, inspiring, encouraging, like just working with a team that gets you there. And so the really good, really big businesses are people that are able to do that again and again and again at a large scale, and just find, because then it's just multiplies, right? You've got all these great people doing all these great things. And that is the crux of what is, I think, really hard though, is you need enough to be able to inspire. You need enough to be able to get to that point where you actually have a whole slew of people. Otherwise, yeah, it's just you, right?
Yeah. But you're right, to share that vision, the ability to share that vision with people in a way that they can embrace it and make it their own.
Yeah, exactly. And finding the right people, and empowering them, but not giving them too much power. Like it is like it is what it is, right? It's a hard balance.
Yeah. Do you have partners in your current business?
Yeah, there's about 50 people at our company. There's just over 20 of us are, call it, partners, and we're kind of leading. We're the ones who are kind of bringing in the business, but we're kind of the leaders with the leads on with our clients, and then the rest of the team, the 30 odd, are sort of support and the engine behind it, and the power to do a lot of the analysis and work and that sort of thing that goes behind us. So it's an interesting size that we are at right now, for sure, because when you get to a size like ours, we're not huge. We don't have crazy processes and whatever. But you start to need them. You start to need I don't know, head of HR and head of marketing, whatever. But you're also not big enough to necessarily have those things or have enough to do. So it's an interesting kind of time challenge thing to see. So I do find myself being able to influence and be helpful in a lot of those kind of operational things as well. Not only working with my clients, but then also working on our own business because we're trying to grow as well.
Yeah, you've got all those different hats, which every
Yeah.
entrepreneur
Yeah.
has to wear. But I wanted to ask you about partners because I think a lot of people who start their own business think, or who are thinking about starting a business, they think they might like to take on a partner. But then it's like, how do you do that successfully? That you've heard so many, my CPA said, don't have a partner. But sometimes you want that, right? Sometimes you need it. And sometimes you just want to have somebody to bounce ideas off of who has a stake in your business. And any advice for people who are kind of in that situation?
Yeah, so I would go existential with that almost. I would say that part of what we sometimes strive for, I've realized this going through what I've gone through, what we sometimes strive for is success. And we want some form of success. A lot of times it's monetary, but it doesn't have to be, so that our peers and people will like us and that we'll be revered and that it'll be so easy to make friends and everyone will love me because I've done this successful thing, right? But it's a really long road to do that by yourself. If you're saying, I'm going to do this all by myself, and in the end, I'm going to have all these friends because I built that business and it was only me and they'll know it was me. Fine, maybe that's true. But part of life is finding people you like to hang out with and hanging out with them. And I think that, I don't know, I'm a big Seinfeld fan, and I think that, whatever, you can make as many jokes, and that's what they do. But like, if you can get to a place in this world where you can sit in a coffee shop with your three best friends and just tell jokes and have a good time, and you can do that again and again and again and it never gets bored, like, you found it. And not everyone has the luxury of being someone without a job and being a comedian and whatever. Like, sometimes work has to be that place where you're having those connections and that where you love to come every day. And so if you can find that with a partner, with someone you're excited to obviously, create a family with, but then also maybe create a business with, I mean, don't let some accountant take that away from you. Do it. I think the world is exploring and trying to find out how you can connect with someone else. That's all we're trying to do. That's what you're trying to do with the business. That's what you're trying to do with your life. That's what it is. So you struck a chord there. But yeah, I'm passionate about sort of that, and that it's people. So don't forget about people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Greg, is there something that you want to make sure people know, something that that you want them to take away from this conversation that we haven't touched on yet?
I would just say I don't know if I was cynical about entrepreneurship or not, but I maybe want to preface and make sure that I do think that everyone tells you not to go in the restaurant business, not to start a business, not to do whatever. You actually should. You need to kind of go through the gauntlet of everyone telling you you shouldn't before you do, because it is something you really need to be all in on to do. So I would encourage people to I'm not trying to be discouraging. Some of the best entrepreneurs out there and people who they're the people that I revere the most in the world as well, and I do want to be their friend. And so I think that don't be dissuaded by that. I do think that there is a negative side. There are failures, there are whatever, but that's not a reason not to do it. That's a reason to do it.
Right.
And so I'd leave you maybe with that.
That's beautiful. I love that. So, Greg, how can people get in touch with you if they want to listen to your podcast, if they just want to learn more about you? Maybe they have a cool business they want to sell with a multi-million-dollar awesome business that they're ready to divest.
So the podcast is Lifetime at Work on any platform, or you can go to lifetimeatwork.com. And then LinkedIn is the best place to find me, though my name is Greg Martin, which is reasonably common. So you have to look for Greg Martin, Origin, or Greg Martin Lifetime at Work, and you'll find me, and that's a good place. Or you can Google Origin Merchant Partners, but I'm one of many there. So yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place to follow, and I'm happy to. I love connecting with people, and I have the podcast to meet new people. I always like to do that, and there's never a bad intro. So you can always reach out.
Excellent. Excellent. Greg, thank you so much for being with us today. I love all that you've shared. I think you've given people a lot of things to think about.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. And thank you, listener, for listening. Why don't you start right now? Grab a piece of paper and a pen and write down at least 3 people who you know who need to hear what Greg is saying, who need to hear the tips about entrepreneurship, who need to listen to some of the good things and bad things that have happened, or who just really need to be able to hear his podcast and forward this episode to them. They will thank you. In the meantime, have a great week.